All right, Rabosai, good morning. Good morning. It is a great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to learn in person together, though it was an incredible zechus to be able to give shir in Yerushalayim Kodesh as well over the last, not as well. It was the ultimate zechus in life to be able to give shir in Yerushalayim Kodesh over the last few days. But Baruch Hashem, it's such a wonderful zechus to be able to be here with all of you in person as well. With that, let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. Steve and Teri Czinn for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in memory of Steve's father, Bunim Tzvi ben Chaim. Leah Sol, zechus refuah sheleimah for her daughter Ilana bas Esther, and for all of those wounded in Eretz Yisroel. Yonason Rachel Wolff for a complete and lasting refuah for Refuel Yitzchak Baruch ben Esther. Jerry and Sora Wolasky in the zechus refuah sheleimah for Zecharya Dov ben Perel Shira, and Azriel and Iris Miller in the zechus of all of the holy soldiers of the IDF, and the merit of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisroel. And we'll say with that, let us begin. So Shechianu v'kimanu v'hegianu, that we have the great zechus Baruch Hashem to begin the last daf in Maseches Kiddushin. Today's daf is Pei Beis 82, and we are beginning at the top at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says as follows: Lo yilamid adam ravak svarim. Sofrim, below TALMUD Isha Sofrim. So the Mishnah says as follows. Now remember again, continuing along the theme that we began in the sugya of Yichud, and again, I just want to also point out, I mentioned it already when we were giving the shir yesterday, is that there is so much to go ahead and speak about in the halachos of Yichud, some real fascinating applications. This is the sugya of Yichud. There is no other sugya of Yichud. I mean, Yichud is referenced, but ultimately this is the primary sugya of Yichud in Shas. So again, we didn't do it halachic justice, but continuing along those same lines of appropriate behavior and interactions between the genders, so the Mishnah says as follows: a single man shouldn't be a teacher of young children. And that's the Gemara. That's what Rashi says over here. Sofrim Rashi says. Sorry, just in this off the Xerox copy. So Sofrim Rashi says, "Melami tinokos kilomar lo yargil ravak atzmo lios min asofrim." So again, we'll discuss why this is. A single man shouldn't be a teacher of young children. V'lo simat isha sofrim. Similarly, again, a woman shouldn't be a teacher of young children. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Afni she'ein lo isha lo yelamed sofrim. Rabbi Lazar says the truth is it's not just a din in a young man; it's any person who's not married should not be a teacher of young children. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yira ravak behema v'lo yishnu shnei ravakim betalas echad. Rabbi Yehuda says similarly, a young single man, should not be a shepherd, nor should two young single men share one cover. In other words, sleep in the same bed and share one cover. Chacham matir. Chacham ultimately permit this. What's going on over here? Says the Gemara, my time, and I will say the first discussion over here. The truth is, Rashi already points out over here. If you look at Rashi in the short lines, about 3 lines in, Rashi says, "Lo yira ravak es habehemos shelo yis avela." Ultimately, we're concerned that if there's a young single man who's shepherding animals, he may desire the animals. In other words, we'll say one of the things that has come up over and over again in these last sugyas is the taiva, the extreme, and sometimes overwhelming desire that people have for sexual activity. And how sometimes, again, that desire manifests itself in very unhealthy and sometimes illicit ways. So that's why, again, Lashon over here is a young single man shouldn't go ahead and shepherd animals out of a fear of taiva. Similarly, again, the Mishnah says, Rashi says, "V'lo yishnu shnei ravakim b'talas echad shelo yava'u lidei mishkav zachar." So similarly, again, the concern of 2 single young men sharing a cover is the concern of engaging in homosexual activity. Okay, the Chachamim said, now the Chachamim are matir this. Rashi says, why they matter this? Because again, the Chachamim say that a person is not, we're not worried about people engaging in bestiality or in homosexual activity. So I will say, it's a fascinating machlokes in general about, everyone agrees with the premise. And the premise is that man has a natural desire and proclivity to sexual activity, right? And people are drawn to that, and that is a constant battle and a constant ongoing desire. The shayla just is, or the machlokes just is, how far does it extend? In other words, how wide does it, so to speak, manifest itself? Does it even go into the concern of bestiality? Does it even go into the concern of homosexuality? So that's the fundamental machlokes in the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. Good, so it says the Gemara. We'll say now the Mishnah begins by focusing on the first part of the Mishnah. So the first part of the Mishnah told us that a single man and a single woman should not go ahead and be teachers of children. So my taima, ilema mishum yinuke. So are you concerned, chas v'shalom, again, with, let's say, this man going ahead and engaging in sexual activity with children? Is that what this is? Vatanya Amrullah Rabbi Yehuda lo nechshedu Yisrael al mishkav zachar v'odal behema. But again, the Chacham said. So again, the Brayso said the Chacham said to Rabbi Yehuda, Klal Yisrael is not nechshad on mishkav zachar, on homosexuality or on bestiality. Now I will say now just to be clear. It's not, the Gemara is not saying that these things don't happen. People are people, and people engage in all kinds of things. Now let's say, when Chazal make a halacha, the halacha always governs the quote-unquote norm. When I say norm, it governs the majority. The majority, it doesn't mean that there's not a minority, and it doesn't mean that there aren't people who engage in a whole spectrum of activities. It's important to understand. I will say also, I just also want to mention, I will say that, remember that in general, especially when dealing with homosexual activity, I will say, if the Torah prohibits something, it means that a person has a natural desire for it. It's very important to understand. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have to go ahead and tell you not to do things that are alien to you. If something is asr, like the Torah says, lo sachmod, don't covet. Why does the Torah say don't covet? Because it's natural for us to covet. So if the Torah goes ahead and says that lo sishkav ish mishka ve'isha, that a man cannot have a sexual relationship with another man like he does with a woman, that means that desire exists. That the desire exists. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, I understand the desire exists, but there are certain things in this world that you can't do. So I just want to point out also how we never stand in judgment of people. That is never our place. It is never our place. People all have their different struggles. People all have their different nisyonos. And again, you wouldn't want anyone sitting in judgment of your struggle, and we can't stand in judgment of someone else's struggle. It's incredibly important. So here, we're talking about halachic behaviors. So the Gemara says as follows. Lo nechshedu Yisrael mishkav zachar v'lo ala behema. Ella ravak mishum imsa dinuki ish mishum avasa dinuki. What's the issue with small children? So we'll say, what is the issue ultimately again with a single man or a woman teaching young children? The issue is when you teach young children, often you're interacting with a parent. So the concern is, if you're a single guy and you're teaching young children, you're interacting with the mothers a lot. So there's just a concern. Again, I will say this goes back to the Yichud Sugya as well. There is a concern that a great amount of interaction with the opposite gender, and again, especially if one of the people involved is not married, could potentially just lead to illicit things. So this is Chazal trying to tell us, be careful, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, with the single man or woman teaching the young children, the man's going to be interacting with mothers, the woman's going to be interacting with fathers, and therefore, again, I will say, one has to go ahead and be careful. I will say, this is the theme over and over and over. How we do have to be careful with the nature of our interactions with the opposite gender. I will say, people who think that they're above these kind of things, right, are usually the first ones to become ensnared in it. It's important. There has to be a modicum of tznius. There has to be a modicum of modesty. It applies again for teachers. It applies for how a person conducts themselves in their own social lives. Right? Couples interact with each other, Baruch Hashem, and that's fine. But there does have to be a certain level of tznius. There has to be not a certain level, there has to be a heightened level of tznius, of modesty, with how any man interacts with any woman who is not his wife, and vice versa. It doesn't mean no interaction. But what it means is mindful interaction, recognizing that, again, people are people, and an individual always has to create certain healthy barriers to ensure that interactions always remain b'kedusha b'TORAH. Rabbi Elazar Omer, af mi she'ein lo. So Rabbi Elazar says, he went so far to say that even if a man is not young, but he doesn't have a wife, he also shouldn't teach young children. Says Gemara, mi she'ein lo isha klal, ol dilma she'eina sheruya etzlo. Rabbi Elazar says, interesting. So is this a din in not being married, or not having your wife with you? In other words, the nafkamina would be, let's say somebody is married, but they're teaching, let's say it was common, especially like in pre-war Europe, that if somebody needed to earn a parnas as a teacher, they often would go ahead and take a teaching position in a different town. in a different town. So what is it? Is it a din ultimately, again, in being married, or is it a din in being married and living with your wife? Which one is it? So the Gemara says, so Tashma, Af mishi yeshlo ve'ena shruya etzlo lo yamatzach. So I'll say so again. You have a pretty explicit brisa where the brisa says even someone who has a wife but doesn't live with her should not go ahead and teach young children. So you see the idea. The idea ultimately is not just being married, but being married ultimately and living in one's wife keeps one grounded, keeps one healthy, and ultimately again, if he doesn't have that, better not to be a teacher of young children. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yireh. Rabbi Yehuda says even a single young man shouldn't shepherd animals. Tanya Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda lo nechshedu Yisra al mishkav zachar v'lo ala behema. Others will say so. The Chaim said back to Berlazer, I understand what you're trying to do, but lemaisa again, even though a person is nechshad for certain immoral activity, it's not any type of immoral activity. A general individual is not going to be suspected. We're not going to worry about him, both for homosexual activity as well as for bestiality. Good. So I will say again, what's the takeaway? You're like, I knew it. That's why I never became a shepherd. No, that's not the takeaway. Right? I'll say the takeaway, and this is really important. We live in a highly sexualized society. Everywhere you look, and everywhere again, we're bombarded by it. To a certain point, we even become numb to it. It's just important for us. Again, Chazal are sensitizing us that we are human beings. We are human beings. And as human beings, we have natural wants and desires. And those wants and desires could so easily derail us from accomplishing the holy objectives in life. Be mindful of it. Be mindful of it. Be mindful of how you interact. Be mindful of what you look at. Be mindful of what you engage in. Just be mindful. Recognizing that all of these things, especially in the realm of morality versus immorality, especially in homosexuality, have the ability to either make us or break us. Says the Mishnah. I will say, incredible. Last Mishnah, Maseches Kiddushin, and it's an overwhelming one. Kol she'asakav im hanoshim lo yisyached im hanoshim. So the Mishnah says as follows: any person whose business deals with women should be careful not to be miyachid, not to be alone with women. I will say now, what does this mean? So take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Kol sha'asakavim hanoshim shemeleches umnoso na'asis l'noshim hanoshim suichaso. So we'll further define this in the Gemara. But I will say, but the idea over here is we're talking about a profession which caters towards women. Right, so again, we'll give examples of it. A person has a profession which caters towards women. In that case, a person should not go ahead and have yichud with women. Now, I will say, remember again from the previous surah we saw, what's the definition of yichud? So remember again, yichud, one man with two women is yichud, right? But along those lines, one man with three women is not yichud. Now, the Mishnah saying is like this: if, however, halacha l'maisa, a person has a profession which causes him to constantly interact and engage with women, then he should be careful not to have any kind of yichud, even with larger groups of women. Look at Rashi. Lo yisachid im hanoshim, afilu im harbe noshim, lefi shelibo gaspohen, v'kula mechavo salov. So we'll say, because he's used to interacting with women, and women are used to interacting with him, the concern is that even with a larger group of women, chas v'shalom, something illicit could occur. So an interesting like carve out. So although the halachos of yichud say one man with two women is yichud, but one man with more than two women is not yichud, if your profession is constantly has you interacting with women, there's a certain regularity that exists, and that regularity ultimately could breed immorality. So therefore, a person like that should be careful never to be alone with women. So what it essentially means is make sure to always have another man with you in your interactions. V'lo yilmad adam mino umnos hanoshim. A man should not teach his son this type of profession. Interesting. In other words, don't teach your child a profession. We'll say this goes with the mandate that we saw earlier on in Kiddushin, that it is a father's obligation to teach his son a parnasa, a trade, right? An umnus of some sort. In other words, we'll say the same way that I arm my son, I arm my child, with moral, ethical lessons, I also have to go ahead and arm my children, specifically a son, the Mishnah is referring to over here, but maybe today applies to all children, with a way to support themselves. Right, so lo yilamid adam es umnus b'nei nashos. Therefore, a father should not go ahead and teach his son this type of profession that will cause him to constantly interact with women. Rabbi Meir says, "Li'olam yilamid adam eno umnus nikia v'kala." This is beautiful. Person should teach his child a profession that is nikia, clean, and kala, easy. Now I will say, well, we'll have to see exactly what that means. And I will say, along with that, and then a person should daven. Tehi, who is the master of all wealth and all property. I will say, which means is that it's not enough to go ahead and to teach your child a profession. Remember, again, along with teaching your child the profession comes what? Divine intervention, a willingness to dive into HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to ask him for assistance. She'ein, we'll say, what a descriptive term of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to daven, to he who owns all wealth and all possessions. My material success, of course, requires my hishtadlus, requires my effort. But at the end of the day, the success is not rooted in my hishtadlus. The success is rooted in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashidam to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Gemara says, she'ein umlus she'ein ba'anios v'ashirus. Rabbi says this is incredible. There is no profession that doesn't both have poverty and wealth. Rabbi say it's the most incredible thing. You could have two people engaging in the same exact profession. Right? Same exact profession. I often find, you know where you find this? It seems to you find this all the time. When people say they're in real estate. Right? I'm in real estate. Right? And it's so interesting, right? Because some people they're in real estate, right? And some people are like, I'm in real estate. You know, it's the same exact thing. It's the same exact. You can do it with any profession, right? With any profession, you have people. It's not the profession that ultimately determines your success. So Gemara says, "Ela hakol fi zechuso." Everything ultimately, I will say, is in accordance with your zechus. Now, I will say this is incredible. Your material success in life, yes, you have to put in your hishtadlus, but your material success in life ultimately, again, is really based on your personal piety as well, based on the spiritual future. And I will say now, again, just to be clear, remember, all of these gemaras always operate within the context of a much greater, we'll call it like philosophical discussion. There are plenty of people who are very righteous and are poor, right? And plenty of people who are not righteous and materially successful. So obviously, again, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world with a complex math, so to speak. You know, there's a lot that goes into this. But in terms of on an individual level, how do we interact with our parnasa? How do I interact ultimately, again, with my livelihood? How do I see my material success? So it's important to understand, yes, I have to put in my effort, but at the end, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu controls everything. And my material success in this world is going to be fundamentally rooted in my personal piety. How is my ruchnius doing? And if my ruchnius is up to par and really exceeding expectations, then hopefully that's the recipe for material success. And if my ruchnius ultimately, again, is falling way below what I should be putting out, then at the end of the day, I won't meet with material success. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ra'isa is incredible. Rabbi Shimon says, Ra'isa miyamecha chayev va'of sheishlam omnus. It's incredible. Rabbi Shimon says, have you ever seen an animal, right, the chaya, an animal, a non-domesticated animal, or a bird that has a day job? Right? Have you ever seen something like that where someone's reporting to the office first thing in the morning, and yet somehow all of their needs are taken care of? And Rav Shimon says, these animals, why were they created? They were created to serve me. They were created for me. And I was created to serve my master, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Certainly then, because you hear the Kavachomer over here? Have you ever seen an animal showing up at an office, right, to make a parnasa? No. Somehow all of their needs are taken care of. And yet, they're only created to serve me. So I, who is created to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Alachas kama v'kama, eino din she'espanish lo b'tzar. I certainly should be able to make my parnasa without any kind of tzar, without any kind of difficulty. So let's say, here's the problem. It sounds so beautiful. What's the problem? There's a lot of tzar. There is, it's hard to make a parnasa, and it's hard to support a family. And even if you're quote-unquote successful, sometimes, again, the amount of success you're bringing in is still not enough to go ahead and take care of your family, take care of your needs. So what do you do? So Rabbi Shimon says, how do you reconcile this? Well, it's incredible. It's not a problem with parnasa. The problem I will say is that often the reason I'm not bringing in the parnasa I need to bring in is because my actions are not where they need to be. And because my actions are not where they need to be, I will say, listen to this, my actions are negative. In other words, behaviorally, actionally, I'm not where I need to be, and as a result, vikipachti es parnasasi. I literally again have like cut off my parnasa, right? I will say what's more saying over here is very often it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's standing in my way. It's me who's standing in my way. I'm placing myself. I'm the obstacle. If only I was spiritually stronger, if only I was doing more, if only I was accomplishing more, then ultimately, again, the parnasa would come along as well. I will say there is a beautiful, beautiful idea. Just be mindful of the time. I think we're okay. There's no makeup today, right? There's a beautiful, beautiful idea. I will say this lashon over here. So they told us Yaakov Yosef of Palnai. So it says something absolutely beautiful. He quotes the Chovas Halavavos. And the Chovas, we actually learned this together. It says the Chovas Halavavos points out, why is it that a person why does parnasa take so much effort? Right? Why does making a living take so much effort? And the Chovas Halavavos says, Shelo yelo pinai lis asik behevle olam hazeh. Chadosh Baruch Hu made parnasa difficult. Why? So he shouldn't have free time. I will say, unstructured free time is the bane of man's existence. Think about any time that you've gone ahead and made a mistake in life. It never happens in the context of being busy. It always happens in the context of being idle. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made parnasa so difficult. Why? So that a person should have free time. Well, again, not having free time doesn't mean you shouldn't relax. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have. Free time means, we spoke about this at the Piagetna, unstructured, productive time. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made parnasa a little bit more challenging than maybe it has to be, in order that I shouldn't have unstructured free time. He says, Aha Adam, so a person who chooses to use his time ultimately again in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then ultimately again, Yasig parnasa v'lo torah miyuchad, will be able to make his parnasa without an incredible amount of effort. Why? Because since he's already using his time wisely, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not have to occupy him with the creation of parnasa. You hear what's going on over here? See, the whole Yaakov Yosef says the whole chap over here is HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes me busy with earning a parnasa so that I shouldn't be idle. Because if I'm idle, I get myself into trouble. But a person who's already made the commitment not to lead an idle life, I maximize my life. I maximize my time. Well, if I'm maximizing my time, then guess what? Parnasa could come a little bit more easily, because Chadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have to occupy me with parnasa, because I'm already using my time well. So the Toldos Yaakov Yosef says, that's the pshat. That's what Reb Shimon Elazar was saying. Why do I struggle with parnasa? Listen to this. Kapach has parnasasi. It's not a punishment, I will say. Sometimes the reason HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes me struggle with my parnasa, kapach has parnasasi, so I will say sometimes when I have to struggle with parnasa, it's not a punishment. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu trying to keep me occupied. Because he recognizes that if I'm not occupied, I'm going to get myself into all kinds of trouble. So there was Yaakov Yosef says, so what's the key to not struggling with parnasa? Making sure proactively that I'm using my time wisely. If I am properly scheduled, if I'm using the moments of life in the highest productive way, and again, I want to be clear, highest productivity doesn't mean you're learning all the time. Highest productivity means you could account for how your time is used. If you could account for how your time is used, then Toldos Yaakov Yosef Chadosh Baruch Hu will give you parnasa more easily, because he doesn't have to keep you occupied. But if I'm idling in life, it was incredible. I was coming out of the airport yesterday, and the airport has these signs by passenger pickup. The sign says, no idling. No idling. And I said, Ribono shel olam, hineni muchan muzumin lekabel es musarecha. First thing I saw when I came into Chutz La'aretz, literally first words I saw when I stepped out of JFK Airport, no idling. No idling. That's it. That's the mantra, no idling. So if there's no idling, right? Not I-D-O-L-I-N-G, right? Again, idling, I-D-I, right? So no idling, I will say. So again, if a person is busy and a person is using their time productively, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them parnasa more easily. But if I'm idling, because listen, I got to keep this guy out of trouble. How do you keep a person out of trouble? I'll say nothing keeps you occupied like working very hard to make ends meet. So sometimes how hard we have to work for parnasa is fundamentally dependent on how we use our time. Okay, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Abagorian, Ish Saiton or Mishuma Abagoria, Lo Yilamid Adam Espino, Chamar. So it's interesting. He goes through a list now of professions that you should not go ahead and teach your kids. Chamar, a donkey driver. Gamal, a camera driver. Kedar. Now, I will say Kedar, he says over here, it's actually interesting because he gives different kinds of definitions over here. Sorry. Did I miss the Rashi? Okay, all right, we'll come to it again. Kedar, we're going to see is an interesting machlokes as to what it means. Kedar usually means like a potter, but we'll see it means something different over here. Safan is a sailor, Roa is a shepherd, the Chenveni, a shopkeeper. Okay, so this is the list of things you should not do. Why? Yonason listim. Unfortunately, these types of professions usually go ahead and you have some kind of theft. So if you look at Rashi says over here, it is here Chamar Gamal Safan Kedar. So we'll say, so again, Kedar, according to Rashi over here, is Bal Kronos, is a wagon driver. So what's the chap over here? Rashi says, Kol Elu Umnus Listios, Ki Shalonim Bidrachim Heim Nichnasa Veloktim Eitzim in Akramim, Upeiros Vod Nishcharim La'adam Uma'avir Natranam. So we'll say, in Niskar La'adam. So we'll say, so apparently, because these professions often require travel, so people help themselves to stuff they find in other people's fields. Again, Chenveni, we're going to see, is Lamaisa an issue, is often an issue of overcharging. So these are things that a person should not do because ultimately they come to thievery. Rabbi Yehuda Mishmo, right? Hachamarin Ruban Rishoim. This is Rabbi Yehuda says most donkey drivers are Rishoim. V'agimolim Roban Ksherim. And ultimately, but camel drivers, the majority of them are Ksherim. V'asapon Ruban Chasidim. Sailors, most of them are pious. And we'll say, what's the chap over here? So again, donkey drivers, we saw before that Lamaisa, they often end up just stealing things from other people. Again, what's the chap with camel drivers and sailors? We'll say, camel drivers have to operate in the desert. Sailors have to operate on the open sea. There's nothing that makes you more dependent on God than being in the middle of a desert or in the middle of the ocean. So therefore, again, interesting to have a different version of here. Rabbi Yehuda says these people are often the most pious. So the Gemara goes weiter. Tov shebarofim legehenim. All right, this might require a little bit of explanation, right? The best of doctors go to Gehenna. I was saying, now what's that? So take a look at Rashi. So Rashi says over here, Rashi says, Tov Shabro from Gehenna. Both say it's like 3 lines up from before the lines get wide. Eino Yari Min Acholi. So I will say, what is a doctor? A doctor, according to the Mishnah, is the person who is most prone to arrogance, right? Why? Because the doctor thinks he knows everything. After I will say, think about it, a person is a doctor, that means they are the Ribono Shel Olam's shutaf, the Ribono Shel Olam's partner in healing. Right? Affecting refuah is one of the most incredible things in the world. But having the ability and the knowledge to partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do that, and not recognizing that it's not you, doctor, it's you as a shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you forget that piece, that breeds an incredible amount of arrogance and hubris. And arrogance and hubris is the pathway, right? It's the yellow brick road right down to Gehenna. So look at Rashi. He says over here, Tov Shabbat Gehenna, and the Yarmin Acholi. So first of all, again, often the doctor thinks he's unsusceptible to illness, right? Since he knows everything about how to heal, he thinks he's above illness. The doctor often, again, only eats, very healthy food. He feels that he doesn't have to daven, right? Because after all, again, he possesses the knowledge. Upamim shahorig nefashos. So also, this is a bit more sinister. Sometimes the doctor is neglectful in his duty to care for others. And sometimes the doctor only works for a fee. And if the person can't go ahead and pony up the cash, the doctor says no. So both say, essentially, you see, people think that this is an indictment of doctors. It's actually just the opposite. It's the Mishnah telling us how much koach the doctor has as a shutaf to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But like any situation where there is great power, there is also the possibility for great undoing as well. So sometimes the best of the doctors, ultimately, again, are the ones who go to Gehenna for the reasons that we just mentioned over here. And the best of the butchers, Shutfo Shel Amalek. Ultimately, again, as a partner of Amalek. Now, this is actually interesting. Rashi says over here, why is he a partner to Amalek? Look at Rashi. First, why? Line Tov Shabbat Habachim, Svekei Trefos Bos Liyado V'chas Amamono Machilan. Sometimes we'll say a butcher has a Yitzhara, ultimately, again, to kind of not be careful with guidelines, right? Because remember, a butcher is an animal, right? The shech's the animal, butcher is the animal. It turns out the animal is not kosher. So again, if halacha l'maisa, that's a major financial loss. So he may be tempted to go ahead and cut corners. Now, I will say, it's interesting because according to Rashi, why does that make him a partner with Amalek? So Maharsha says a little bit differently. Maharsha says, actually, it's a different idea. I will say, a butcher is someone who's constantly taking life. The problem with constantly taking life is it can numb you to the value of life. I will say, what's Amalek? Amalek was the nation that had no value of human life. I will say, there's an incredible sefer. I remember when I was doing Hilchos Shchita, so there's an incredible sefer called Simla Chadasha. Simla Chadasha is a sefer that goes through all of Hilchos Shchita in 30 days. The idea is for the shochet to constantly, and in the introduction to the sefer Simla Chadasha, he discusses the concept ultimately of how when you're a shochet or you're a butcher, you could easily become desensitized to human life. It's the same thing with the doctor also. Anytime you're constantly dealing with death, it's easy to become desensitized to life. And when you become desensitized to life, that of course represents a very scary moment of chas v'shalom. What's Amalek? What's Amalek? And I will say today, Amalek includes, Yishmael, Amalek includes what we've seen. We've seen what Amalek is. Amalek represents a lack of regard for human life. For human life. Just human life doesn't mean anything. So when human life doesn't mean anything, you could commit the worst atrocities. When human life doesn't mean anything, you could use, innocent civilians as shields. When human life means nothing, you could do anything. You could do anything. So Gemara says, just be careful. Because if you're always operating around death, that lack of sensitivity to life could easily set in. Very scary. Rabbi Norai says, what's the end of the Mishnah? It's beautiful. Maniach ani kol umnu sheba olmo ve'ani melamed es b'ni el Torah. This is beautiful. So Rabbi Norai says, as far as I'm concerned, right, I would leave behind every profession, and I only want to teach my son Torah. What is Rabbi Norai saying? Say on one hand, we have this concept like we saw before. You have to have a profession. You have to have a profession. A father has an obligation to go ahead and teach his son a profession. Rabbi Norai says, what the problem is? Every profession is riddled with challenges. And it is. We'll say that's the way that it is. There's no such thing as a profession that doesn't have its challenges. So like Rabbi Norai looks at the Mishnah and he says, you know what? Maybe I'm going to leave aside all of the professions of the world. Ve'eni melamed es bini el Torah. I'm only going to teach my child Torah. Sha'adam ochal mischara ba'olam hazeh va'keren chayam as l'olam haba. A person goes ahead and enjoys its reward in this world, but yet the principle is sustained to benefit from the world to come. Ushar kala umnus ein okain. I'll say, but other professions are not like that. Why? Ki sha'adam bali de choli, oli de zikna, oli de yisurin, ve'enu yachal lasa gumalachto, hare hu makes brav. We'll say, this is such an incredible thing. This is so humbling. A person has a profession. Now, you could have a person who is known as like the best in his profession. The best in his profession. They'll say, what happens when that person gets old? Or for that matter, even not old, what happens when that person loses his faculties? Physical faculties, intellectual, mental, or mental faculties. We'll say, what happens to that great profession? What happens to that great profession? Gone. And we see it. It's the most humbling thing in the world. Someone who is on the top of their game, and suddenly again they no longer have the skill set to be able to do the things they once did. Everything they worked for, everything they did, not everything they worked for, because that's always there, but that entire profession which often defined them is gone. So it says, "Harei meis barav." Literally, you could die in famine. Or that's quite on a literal fashion. Aval Torah eno kain. And I will say, Torah is not like this. Ella mishamarto mikora b'nuruso. Torah guards you from all evil in your youth. V'nosenes lo acheris v'tikva b'ziknuso. And it gives you hope. We'll talk about this more later on. It gives you hope in your old age. But now, in other words, Torah sustains you when you're young, and ultimately sustains you when you're old. And I will say, it's not only that. Even if you can't learn Torah, the Torah of your youth carries you into your old age as well. Or as he's talking over here, the ability to learn Torah in your youth and in your old age. But even if a person can't learn Torah in their old age, we'll say the power, your career, we'll say, the incredible part is your career only serves you when you could do it. The moment you can't do it, you could reflect on it, right? You could enjoy the accomplishments of it. But once it's done, this is the big problem. This is the big problem that people have when they retire, right? They retire and they're walking around and they don't know what to do. Suddenly, again, they're having shalom bayis problems, right? Because, like, the wife is like, you need to get out, right? Like, you need to do something. And so I will say, I didn't realize, like, my whole life I was productive, right? My whole life I was doing something, and now it's done. So, okay, Torah is not like that. So I say, profession is only good as long as you can do it. Once you can't do it, very nice, whatever. We'll have some plaques on the wall. But Lamaisa, once it's done, it's done. Torah is always there for you. It ultimately, again, guards you in your youth, and ultimately gives you hope for the future. In your youth, what does it say? Those who put their trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be given renewed strength. Right? Ultimately, and they will be fruitful even in their old age. We'll say next week's parasha, Avraham Zakein, Vashem Berachis Avraham Bakol. Avraham Avinu became old, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu again blessed him with everything. So the Gemara says, Matzinu, Sha'asa Avraham Avinu Eskala Torah Kula, Achlo Nitna. Avraham Avinu performed the entire Torah, even before it was given. Shene Emar, Ekev Asher Shama Avraham Bekoli, Vayishmar Mishmarti Mitzvosai Chukosai V'Sorosai. Shabbos says, the Gemara understands, why does the pasuk say, Vashem Beirachis Avraham Bakol? How did Avraham Avinu have everything? Because he had Torah. And when you have Torah, you have what you need to take care of yourself in your youth, and you have what you need to take care of yourself in your old age. Now, I will say, just before we go on, what does Rabbi Norai mean when he says, Maniach ani kala melamed espini ela Torah? Right? I'm going to leave aside every profession and only teach my son Torah. I will say, come on, that is not a sustainable model. That's not a sustainable model, right? We see it. It's not should you have a segment of Klal Yisrael sitting and learning? Of course. But again, en masse, it's not really a sustainable model. So how could Rabbi Norai say that? Well, see, Rabbi Norai is saying something different. Maybe what he's saying is like this. Maniach ani kol umno sheba'olam means, before I teach my child a profession, right? Before I help him find any kind of profession, right? Ultimately, again, what? Eini malamid esbini ela Torah. Before we talk about what college you're going to go to, right? What you're going to do for a living, all the things that sometimes parents get very preoccupied with, even at a young age. Before we get into any of that stuff, I'm putting all that on the side. And what am I focusing on? I'm focusing on building a spiritually strong child. Let's say, especially in today's day and age, what is the key of chinuch? The key of chinuch is really, just in my humble opinion, not what math track you're on, or not what AP classes you're taking. Those are all, it's nice, it's good. It's valid, but all of us know in the long term, they mean absolutely nothing, right? What matters more than anything is building a spiritually robust child. If your child is spiritually strong, if your child is brought up on Torah, if your child loves learning, knows how to learn, appreciates Chadosh Baruch Hu, Torah and mitzvos, there'll be plenty of time to find a profession. There'll be plenty of time to become out for academic excellence. Plenty of time for all of that other stuff. That's Rabbi Norai. Rabbi Norai, I don't think Rabbi Norai is saying, I'm not going to teach my kid any trade, I'm just going to give him Torah. That's beautiful. How is he paying the mortgage? Right? How is he paying his bills? Again, what is he sending into the bank? We live in this world. The same word Chadosh Baruch Hu says, only from the sweat of your brow are you going to eat bread. You have to work for parnasa. He's not saying I'm not teaching my son an omnus, but the first step in my child's chinuch is not their academics. The first step in my child's chinuch, maniach. We'll say maniach doesn't mean I have to set aside for maniach means I'm placing it on the side. Maniach ani kol umnus sheba'olam ve'eni malamid esbini ela Torah. To have a successful child, there has to be a strong religious, spiritual Torah identity. That's number one. And then once you have that, you can take on any profession you want. Once you have that, you can be as successful as you want in the world, but you will be grounded in ruchnius. You'll be grounded in holiness. You'll know how to navigate this sometimes complex world. That's what Rabbi Norai is saying. He's not saying give up on parnasa just for Torah. He's saying gird yourself, arm yourself, bolster yourself, build a strong spiritual identity first and foremost. That is the most important thing for the Yid. That's the most important thing from the Jew. Then after you have that, or again after you establish a foundation and you continue to build on it, then you could do whatever else you want to do. But don't bypass the most important thing, Rabbi say, that is our sacred mission in this world, which is ultimately, again, Malamed es b'nei Torah, to create for ourselves and for our children a strong, unshakable spiritual identity. Says the Gemara. Okay, we really have to go. Tanra Banon. Kol she'asaka b'manashim Sora Ra. Should I say, so any person who has a profession that just deals with women, ultimately, again, develops a very negative character. The idea is a concern of immorality. So the Gemara says, Kigon, hatzarfin, v'asrikim, v'anekuros, v'arochlin, v'agardim, v'asofrim, v'akobsim, v'agara, v'habalan, v'aborsikim. Okay, just, that's a pretty extensive list of things you can't. And I will say, these are all things, ultimately, again, these are all professions that brought a person in constant contact with women. So again, the tzarfin, I will say, are again, Rashi says over here, goldsmiths, srikim. Srikim are people who go ahead and tease fabric. Nekuros, Rashi says, are people who clean hand mills. Rochlin, spice merchants. Gardim, also people who deal with fabrics. Sofrin, that's what we saw before with the teacher of young children. Kovsim, launderers. Gara, hablon, vaborsiki. So once again, Rashi goes that Gara is a bloodletter. Balon is a bathhouse attendant. Borsiki is a tanner. We'll say if a person has this profession, they cannot go ahead and be a king or be a kohen gadol. My time, what's the reason? It's not because they're apostle. But these were considered to be less than respectable professions. So because of that, again, these were professions that were considered to be like lower tier type of professions. And remember, again, when appointing someone to a melech or a kohen gadol, they have to be looked up to, which means they have to come from a status of material wealth as well. There are 10 things that are said about a bloodletter. He walks on his side. These are all things that represent arrogance and haughtiness. He walks on his side. He's arrogant. He always reclines. He's stingy. He has an evil eye. Eats a lot, and he only excretes a little, which represents having like a fine diet. He's chashad on immorality, because again, he spends a lot of time with women. V'ala gezel, and on theft. V'al shichus, and about murder. In other words, don't be a bloodletter. That's the takeaway. Darish bar kafra. The olam yilamed adam es beno umnus nekiya v'kala. Mishnah said a person should teach his child a profession that is nekiya, that is clean and kala and easy. So Amr Rabbi Yehuda, what is that? Amr Beis Rabbi saying, mechta de talmiyusa. Okay, to be a sewer. So apparently there was this type of sewing. Mechta de talmiyusa, Rashi points out over here, was a type of sewing like a furrow type of sewing, which apparently was considered to be a relatively easy profession, generated a parnas and allowed you to maintain your spiritual integrity. I will say, just the important thing to remember with all of this is, the takeaway is that my parnasa should never be something that erodes at my spirituality. And if my parnasa is something that causes me to compromise my spirituality, erodes my spiritual integrity, it's the wrong profession. It's the wrong profession. That's the idea. The Gemara is trying to, there can't be an ongoing, otherwise, does a person sometimes run into a conflict in their workplace with their spiritual? Of course, that happens. But the nature of my work can't be something that constantly battles against my spiritual persona and identity. And if it does, then it's time to choose another job. So Gemara says, Tanya, Rabbi Omer, ein lecha umnus she'overes min ha'olam. God says incredible. There is no parnasa. There is no type of parnasa that ultimately, again, isn't void. Isn't void. In other words, we'll say, Overes min ha'olam. Rashi says, Over shebetela min ha'olam, bein shi nikiya, bein shi mu'usa. In other words, let's say, every parnasa at some point in time becomes obsolete. Right? Every type of work at some point becomes obsolete. Ashrei mi sheroas hara be'umnas mu'ula. What's this beautiful? Praiseworthy is the one who sees his parents engaged in a noble profession. Oilo l'mi sheroas hara be'umnas peguma. What's that so profound, right? Our children they learn from how we make our money. How do we make our money? So praiseworthy is the parent. We'll say it goes to a constant theme that Chazal always express, which is children remember very little of what their parents say. Very little of what their parents say, but remember much of what their parents do. And I will say, so again, my child knows how I make my money. My child knows how I conduct myself professionally. My child knows ultimately, again, how I balance spiritual priorities with material priorities. What am I cutting corners on? Where am I taking shortcuts? Am I honest? Do I speak appropriately in business? Do I conduct myself appropriately in my profession? So praiseworthy is the person. It's such a beautiful idea. Praiseworthy is the person who sees his parents engaged in a noble... What's the definition of a noble profession? A noble profession is any profession that allows you to provide for your family and doesn't cause you to compromise your integrity and allows you to build your identity as a Yirei Shamayim. That is a noble profession. Whatever you do, that's as long as it allows you to do those things, that's a noble profession. Praiseworthy is the child who sees that. Woe to the child who sees his parents ultimately engage in a profession in which spirituality is constantly compromised, in which integrity is constantly compromised, in which causes me to take shortcuts in my spirituality. We'll say the world can't exist without a perfumer and without a tanner. I would say, so lucky is the one who is the perfumer, and unlucky is the rebbe. Remember, tanneries stink, and ultimately, enough times working in a tannery, you begin to smell tanner. Both say it's an important yesod as well. Whatever you do for a living, sometimes people think that what they do for a living, they could separate out. That's my job, but I have a different identity. We'll say after a certain amount of time, you smell like your career. So Lamaisa, if you have a good career and you're honest and ehrlich and you're being mekadeshim shamayim, you'll be fragrant. I'll say if every day you're in and you're compromising and you're doing shady stuff and the stuff that's happening that I should not be doing and I'm compromising my spirituality, the stench of it will cling to you over time as well. Incredible. The world can't exist without men and without women. Ashrei misha banav zecharim. Praiseworthy is the one who has sons. Va'aylo lemi shebanav nekevos. And woe to the one who has daughters. I will say, just to understand, what did Chazal saying with this? Anyone who has daughters knows exactly what Chazal is saying to this. So we'll say, the worry that a father has for daughters. The worry that a father has for daughters. And the preoccupation that a father has for the safety and security of his daughters, only someone who has daughters can understand. And someone who has daughters, even once they're married and even once they're on their own, the worry, the fear of a vulnerability of a daughter, I will say, is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. That's what Chazal are saying over here. Sons, you know what the good part about sons is? You're pretty confident one way or another they're going to figure it out. You know your daughters are going to figure it out also. But there's still such a concern and such a care and such a concern that a father has for a daughter that never abates. Never abates. Right? Person should teach his son ultimately again a profession that is nikiya, that is clean, and kala, easy. And I will say once again, what does easy mean? Easy means that it doesn't impinge on your spirituality. I will say it's so incredibly important. You know, people think, I will say, that in order to climb the ladder, look, you got to put in your time and do things that are going to cause you to take shortcuts on your spirituality. But it's only for a certain amount of time. Let's say, who says that a Jew is allowed to take a job that consumes 80 hours of his week that he can't daven with a minion? Who says? In other words, people justify it because it's an essay. It requires a shayla. Person has to ask about whether or not they're really permitted to engage in a profession that is fundamentally going to impinge on their spiritual development. It's not so pashut that a person is allowed to do that. And it's not so pashut that a person should do that. Again, are there times in life where things become hectic? Of course. But kind of as like a way of going forward, I'll say, a person really has to think about, my parnasa is important, but my spirituality, my ruchnius, is even more important. And a person who goes ahead and engages in a profession that by definition causes him to take shortcuts on his spirituality. Most of you know what the statement I'm making. No one would ever purposely make this statement. But the statement I'm making is, my role in my parnasa is more important than HaKadosh Baruch Hu's role in my parnasa. Whoa. No one would ever actually make that statement. But sometimes we end up making that statement through the choices we make. A person has to be careful with these things. The Gemara says, "V'yivakish rachamim lemisha osher v'nechasim shalom." And a person should daven to he who is in charge of my wealth and my property. Because I will say the truth is, poverty and wealth are not really from your profession. El misha osher shaloshin emar liyakesev. But the reason why we never take shortcuts in our spirituality for the purpose of our parnasa is a very simple one. Because my wealth and my success doesn't come from my parnasa. My wealth and my success comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Don't take shortcuts in your spirituality for the purpose of advancing your career. Rabbi Shmuel Silber Omer, Imra Isa Miyamech. Rabbi Shmuel Silber Omer. We'll say first white line. It's beautiful. Miyamai, lo re'isi tzvi kayetz. I never saw a deer who made his parnasa through drying figs. right? V'ari sabal. And I never saw a lion who made his parnasa through carrying packages. V'shual chanvini. I never saw a fox who was a shopkeeper. V'heim misparnasim shlo b'tzar. Somehow, they all find their parnasa. They all find their parnasa. V'heim lo nivru el Hashem shuni. And they were only created only to serve me. V'ani nivrisi l'shamish eskoni. And I was created in order to serve my master. Ma'elu shelo nivru el Hashem shuni misparnasim shlo b'tzar. So if the animal kingdom, which were only created to go ahead and serve me, they find their parnasa without tsar, without difficulty. And I was created to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Certainly, I should be able to find my parnasa without tsar. So both say, so why do I have tsar? So why, this is what we saw before. Rabbi Norai, why do I have tsar? Why do I have tsar? So the Gemara says, Elo shari osias masai. Both as we saw before, why? Because halacha l'maisa. Ultimately, again, kipachti. We explained it before, as we saw before quoted by the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Palnai. They'll say why. Ultimately, if I struggle with parnasa so often, it's because HaKadosh Baruch, I'm not living a good enough spiritual life. I'm idling too much. So HaKadosh Baruch has to keep me busy with parnasa. But if only I would just get my life in order, use my time wisely, I would be able to make my parnasa maybe with a little less tsar. Incredible. Let's go back to Rabbi Norai, Omer Maniach, Ani is called Umnus. We'll say, let's finish up. We'll say, end of Maseches Kiddushin. End of Maseches Kiddushin. We'll say, Shechionu, Vikimonu, Vigiyonu, Lazmana Zaitanya. Rabbi Norai, Omer Maniach, Ani called Umnus Sheba Olam, Ve'in Melamed Espini Ela Torah. Rabbi Norai says, I would leave aside every other profession in the world and I would only teach my son Torah. Remember again, we explained, Rabbi Norai was really saying, you can't forsake parnasa, but you could go ahead and first work on establishing strong spiritual identity before you worry about the other things, because having a core identity rooted in Torah Bosai, that guides you through life. So Rabbi Norai says, I would leave aside everything and only teach my son Torah. Shekol u'ma sheba'olam ein omniso el b'mei yalduso. Rabbi will say, any profession you're going to have, no matter how great you are, is only going to sustain you and take care of you in your youth. But in your old age, but again, your old age, when you can't do your parnasa, suddenly again, that parnasa which was there for you all those years, you don't have, and a person could die from famine. Torah is not like that. Omedes la'adam be'esiel do so. Rabbi will say, the Torah that you learn in your youth stands for you in your youth. And it gives you hope and optimism for your future. The Aldu Somau, Omer Rabbi say, what's the pasuk? The Kol Hashem Yachalifu Koach. Those who put their faith in HaKadosh Baruch Rabbi say, will have renewed strength. Rabbi say, sometimes if you're walking around with constant fatigue, you know what the answer to constant fatigue is? More ruchnius, more Torah, pushing yourself more. The more you invest in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more you put into your spiritual identity, the more koach HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you. Eyalu Ever Kanshram Bizik. Nusoma Omer. Rabbi say, what does it say in your old age? Old Yunuvim B'Seva Yeshenim Vera'ananim Yeyu. Rabbi say, ultimately, again, they will be fruitful even in their old age. Rabbi say, the power of Torah and the power of a Torah identity. Rabbi say, ultimately, again, is number one. If I begin with it, it lays the proper groundwork for how I acquire my parnasa. And I will say there are very few things in life that you could say that you will have in every stage of life. Your career, I will say careers come and go, even if you're at the top of your game, right? Once you can't do your career anymore, okay, you could bask in past accomplishments, but it's done. And I will say, but the Torah I have in life, sustains me while I learn it in my youth and still remains by my side as a zechus and as a light even in my old age. I will say, what a way to end the Masechta. This is the beauty of the daf. The daf is our light. The daf is our guiding light. We have to stop. But the daf ultimately, again, is what guides us every step of the way. I will say, you know what the beauty of the daf is? The daf is incredible when you learn it. And I will say, you feel it walking by your side. You feel the Blina Rav. You feel Maseches Kiddushin walking by your side each and every moment of the day as you go. The Gemara is closed already. But yet, I still feel the blot with me. I still feel the daf with me. Every single step that I take. All right, more about this in Eretz Hashem by our siyum. I'll say shkoyach, mazel tov, and mazel tov on Seder Nashim. Tomorrow b'shat tov, mitzlachos, Shabbos afternoon, we have the great zechus to begin Maseches Bava Kama, Seder Nezikin, b'shat tov, mitzlachos. We'll say mazel tov and Eretz Hashem bizocha to continue to learn together, to continue to be Messiah together, and halavai our next siyum in Eretz Hashem, even sooner than our next siyum, our next blot. Shem Eretz Hashem being Yerushalayim habnur mehira b'yameinu. Amen. Shkoyach, thank you. All right, Chabran Zoom, Mazel Tov, everyone. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov.
Welcome back.
Thank you.